Reddit, tell me your glitch in the Matrix stories. This will probably get buried. When I was around 20, a few years ago, I kept having dreams about a woman with long black hair named Aurora, pronounced Aurora. They were different dreams, but for some reason, her distinct face and name always ended up in them. It got to the point where I would wake up frustrated and confused, trying to Google her name or find out how I was connected to her. After a few months she stopped showing up and I dismissed it, thinking my brain was just being a scumbag. Fast forward a few years later, Halloween 2009. I'm in the car with a friend stopped at a gas station. I'm about to pull out and merge onto a highway when I get a phone call from a random number. So I stopped the car but no one answered. There was a person behind me who grew impatient, honked at me, and then swerved in front of me instead of waiting for 2 seconds for me to move. Second they get on the highway, some silver Civic loses control of their wheel and crashes into the car that swerved in front of me. I called the cops and waited at the gas station for them to come. Turns out the drivers of both cars died. It 100% would have been me if I hadn't have got that phone call. Called it back a few hours later out of gratitude and curiosity. Rang 3 times and went to voicemail. Hi, you've reached Aurora. Please leave your name and number. Never had goosebumps like that in me life. Called it again the next day, because I was that confused about the whole situation. Some woman answers, we get to talking. I tell her my entire story including the dreams I had. She tells me she doesn't know how I got her number and that she never called me as far as she remembers. Weird. Ask her if she has a Facebook to confirm if she is in fact the woman in my dreams. Check her Facebook. Holy frick, it's her. If that's not a glitch in the Matrix then I'm just bat crap crazy. I've related this story before but here goes. The parallel universe answering machine. This happened about 15 years ago. I called my friend up and he wasn't home so I left a message on his answering machine. I said, hey, it's me Khalil Extremists. Sorry I missed you. Call you later. Bye. And then I hung up and left the house. I made no other calls. Later that day he called back and he says, wow, that was quite a message you left. Who was that girl you were talking to? I was like, what are you talking about? I wasn't talking to any girl. Well, as it turns out the message didn't end after I said bye. I had to go over to his house and listen to this message a few times. After my initial message that I did leave, as quoted above, there was a slight pause and it continues on for another 30-40 seconds or so with me talking to some girl. It was my voice, but a conversation I never had with a girl whose voice I didn't recognize. You could compare it to the message I know I did leave and the two voices were indistinguishable. Not just the voice but, you know, talking mannerisms. It was my voice. Also, references to my occupation and activities were the same. Basically, in this conversation I was talking to this girl about going skiing but I had to go down to my shop and work on a car first, which totally correlated to me. Then the message just stopped. It was recorded on one of those digital answering machines that recorded the message to a chip so there was no tape I could have taken and had analyzed. Unfortunately. Also, neither I nor my friend had party lines so that's not an explanation. It was very freaky. I can't explain it. TLDR. I may have connected to an alternate universe through a telephone answering machine. As I was reading this, the lights went out in my room. It's definitely because I barely plugged in my lamp, but still freaked me right the frick out. This is a creepy thread, man. This happened to me in 3rd grade, and it scared me so much I started crying and had to go to the office to talk to the principal about it. I was in the hallway for misbehaving, and my neighbor Tad, a year younger than me, came walking out of a class to my right, passed in front of me and headed down some stairs. We said hi to each other. About 20 seconds later, he walked out of the same class, passed in front of me, and headed down the stairs. I just stared at him, confused and afraid, and he looked back like, why the F are you looking at me like that? I never realized how much it was like Matrix deja vu. Second, Tad sounds like kind of a dong. You should stick with Tad Prime. At 12 years of age my mom let me stay in the truck as she went grocery shopping. As I wait I see an old guy walking towards the truck with an indescribable look at me as if I know too much. He stops 5 feet from the truck, looks at me for a couple seconds and heads back the exact way he came. It was rather traumatic for some reason and very confusing at that age. 5-6 years later my dad was showing me home videos of us at Yellowstone. At Old Faithful I noticed the same guy, same look, same clothes peering at us on camera and at me through the TV. I'm freaked out just telling this. It's you from the future. At a friend's place back in 2008, when we were all teenagers, we had a cool shed at a friend's that we'd hang out in every weekend. It had 4 sets of bunk beds, tables, a fireplace, TV, fridge, etc. The whole lot. One night we were all hanging out and when I decided I needed a pee, I walked out the front door of the shed and started to walk to the right when I stopped. Now let me explain the layout here. As you walk out of the shed, his house is to the left and to the right is where we all parked our cars. Further out you're left with empty fields and trees. It was dark by now, the lights from the house illuminating the space between the house and our cars, but trailing off just past them. As I took a step to the right, intending to go behind the cars to relieve myself, I saw my friend's older brother standing there. I watched him for a good 5-10 seconds as he stood there, facing into the darkness. He then proceeded to walk behind a couple trees and a car before he disappeared. Confused, I walked back into the shed and asked my friend what his brother was doing by the cars. The conversation went as follows. Me: "Hey man, what's your brother doing by the cars?" Him: "What do you mean?" Me: "He just walked off behind the cars." "Brother, I'm right here." I looked over and there his brother was, sitting down on one of the chairs with a drink. He was wearing the exact same clothes as I saw him in and the only way to get into the shed was through the door that I was standing in the way of. To this day, I've no idea how it all happened. I'm guessing I was just seeing things, but the fact that I watched him walk around for a good 10 seconds has always puzzled me. I've never had anything else like that happen. Oh man, I have one of these that involves the Matrix. I got my wisdom teeth out in 2000 right around the time that the original Matrix came out on VHS. I was bombed completely out of my mind on Percocet after coming back from the surgery. I had awful wisdom teeth, and my mom basically just dropped me in bed and went and rented the movie for me because I'd never seen it in theaters. I remember being irritated that the sun through the window was making the TV glare but being too out of it to get up. A little bit after the black cat glitch in the Matrix scene, I passed out and apparently slept for about 8 hours. The tape in the VHS machine kept rewinding itself and playing over and over again. I woke up and the movie was at roughly the same spot as when I passed out, but it was completely dark outside. 0 time lapse for me. Completely lost my mind. Started freaking out and screaming because I thought I'd discovered the secret and somebody turned off the sun. I remember crying and trying to explain to my panicked family, who have never let me live it down. On a semi-related note, after her C-section my wife was on Ambien in the hospital. She wasn't entirely asleep and was talking to her mom about how much she hated the doctor that was in the room. She made her mom usher him out of the room. Her mom was a good sport and pretended to make the doctor leave even though he wasn't there. Drugs are a heck of a drug, man. I think the strangest glitch I've found was back when I was in high school. I was talking to a friend on the phone, describing a dream I had about an ice skating rink, and then he starts to describe the rest of the dream to me from the opposite point of view. It was a while ago so I don't remember everything, but we both described the scenery, what the people were doing, etc. It freaked me out when it happened. One time I spilled a bowl of SpaghettiOs, and as I was cleaning them, I noticed that one was on the ceiling, 9 feet up. I didn't even drop the bowl. I just tipped it over onto the counter by mistake, but sure enough, a single O was right there, stuck to the ceiling. My dad had this little toy monkey that he used to call his favorite child and tease me and my siblings with it. Not in a bad way, but it was really frustrating to us and we spent hours trying to steal it from him. Well anyways, one day we finally got it and threw it into the garbage after drawing on it and mangling it for a bit. My dad laughed and searched for it a bit but basically figured we had thrown it out and gave up after a week or so. Anyways, a few years later, when I was about 17, I'm walking down the street in Toronto. I don't live in was just visiting friends, and see this little orange object on the side of the road. When I walk over to it, I pick it up and see that it was the exact same freaking monkey. It even had the black Sharpie lines on it from when we drew all over it. I honestly cannot even come up with the chances of that happening, especially considering our garbage is sent to a local dump and is nowhere near Toronto. It will be back. I had a friend in high school, let's call him Bob. Bob was a very nice fellow, and while we weren't that close, we had similar tastes in music and we'd share CDs. This is in the late 80s, way before file sharing. Anyway, we eventually graduated, and I moved several hundred miles away to college, and we lost touch. When I left for college, I had one of Bob's CDs still in my possession, Beat, by King Crimson. Fast forward 10 years, I'd graduated college and was knee deep in my career, and finally saved up enough money and bought my first house. In the new house, and while unpacking, I see the CD in a box. Hadn't noticed it in many years, and thought, gee, I really should track down Bob and return this. Right then, the doorbell rings. It's Bob, and he says, hey, you wouldn't happen to still have my King Crimson CD, would you? I look down. I'm holding it in my hand. I hand it to him, and his mouth drops open. Mine probably already is. We exchange pleasantries. I probably asked him how he found me, but I no longer remember. He eventually takes off. I haven't seen Bob since. I was walking through Best Buy one day a couple years ago and I walked past a rack of books. Sitting on the rack was the last book in the Dark Tower series from Stephen King. The front cover had the picture of Roland in front of the tower with the field of roses behind him. I held the dang book in my hand and looked it over. I remembered being puzzled about why it was in a Best Buy, but whatever. I'd read the first 6 and had been waiting for the last one, but my spending money was low that week. I set it down and decided to come back next week after I got paid to buy it. I went back next week and it wasn't there. It slipped my mind after that for a bit, but about a month later I went to B&N to get my copy. They told me it hadn't come out yet. The release date for the book was 6 months later. I pre-ordered it then. When the book actually came out, I went to pick it up. I described the cover out loud to make sure I wasn't crazy. The clerk handed it to me and there it was exactly as I'd held it in Best Buy. I'm late to the party, but this has freaked me out forever. I was a satellite installer and I was driving between 2 small towns in North Carolina, Statesville and Taylorsville. It's about a 20-minute drive of a perfectly straight 2-lane road with pretty much nothing but trees on either side. It's the middle of the day and I'm driving along listening to Howard Stern on Sirius when all of a sudden I go from wide awake to falling asleep. Meaning, 1 second I'm normal, and a second later my head is drooping down and eyes closing, and what snaps me out of it is my car bounces like I just hit a speed bump, but I'm still in the middle of the road. Howard Stern is still in the same sentence, but my GPS signal says it is lost, and then I hear recalculating, and when it comes back I realize I am about 12 miles further down the road than I was, and I had missed my turn by 5 miles. My immediate thought, even though I consider myself a level-headed atheist, was that I fell asleep, hit a tree and died, and was now in some weird afterlife. It was such a strong feeling that I drove to the nearest gas station. Got out, headed inside with the sweaty palms, feeling that the cashier inside was not going to be able to see me. To my relief she did, and I bought a Red Bull. I still think I was hypnotized by the road and drove on some weird autopilot for a while, but losing GPS signal and not missing any of Howard Stern is explainable to me. I even used the Sirius ability to rewind and there was none of the show that I missed. In case you're wondering, my butthole felt fine. Upvote for a fine butthole. This comment is gonna look weird out of context if someone reviews my comments. I used to work in a building that had 3 levels of sub-basements, with the piece of lab equipment I typically worked on in the lowest basement. I had the only key. There was a wired phone in there, and I did work late some nights, but not this night. I was sleeping alone in my apartment when I woke up to a call on my cell phone from my girlfriend at 3 AM. She was in hysterics and asking why I scared her. Apparently she received a call from that basement phone just a minute earlier, with someone who sounded like me slowly repeating her name, until crackling and fading out. My apartment was 10 miles away from work. I thought she was lying, but I saw the 3 AM call from the basement phone logged on her cell myself. Still freaks me the frick out. Used to work in a building that had 3 levels of sub-basements, with the piece of lab equipment I typically worked on in the lowest basement, Raccoon City. My friend used to put up a recurring away message, back in the day when everybody had AIM. She was a Beatles super fan and put up a sentiment from John and Yoko, Acons for Peace. Well, one day I was walking around my college campus thinking about it, but failing to remember the full quote. In my mind, I kept thinking, something for peace, something for peace. What the heck is that away message? Right then, some chick on a cell phone walks by me and screams out Acons. I realize this is not a super freaky story, but it made my day at the time. It's not every day someone screams out Acons in your vicinity at the exact right time. I have 2 stories that are just weird as frick. Both of them are things I just would not believe if someone else told them to me, but I can swear with every fiber of my being that they happened as I write them here. The first happened a couple years ago. I can't remember the occasion, but my mother and I had gone to A&W for lunch, and we were both sitting there eating our meals. We happened to be seated pretty close to the washroom doors, so I noticed everyone going in and out. First person to come out is this old man who's kind of hobbling along. He walked past and I looked at him and went on with my meal. Not 30 seconds later, another man comes out of the bathroom, and at this point I get a little freaked out because I realize it's the exact same person. Same limp, clothing, face, everything. A couple minutes later, the same thing happens except it's an old woman this time. She comes out, then 30 seconds later comes right out of the bathroom again. My mom took a look at me and said, "You look like you've seen a ghost." I just kind of stammered a bit, then wrote it off as me being crazy. The next story is more weird, in my opinion, and is the single strangest occurrence of my life. This happened when I was about 9 years old, but I can still remember it vividly. We were visiting family in Nevada with my dad, and they live out in a very dry area in a fairly good sized trailer. A couple days in, I was playing outside with my cousin, pretty much just messing around in the dirt. At some point, I look up. Right next to the house is a field, I guess, surrounded by wire fence, probably originally for livestock. But anyway, there's this guy standing there. This is a good 300 or more feet away, so I cannot see him clearly at all. Cue the weird. As soon as I look at this guy, I have what I can only describe as an out-of-body experience. My body pretty much just went into lockdown, and I was no longer seeing through my eyes. And I wasn't just floating there or anything. I was in that man's body. Through his eyes I could see 2 little shapes playing across the field, but I could just feel that he saw the shapes as animals. And then I realized he was holding a freaking shotgun. After that I regained my body and blurted out, "We have to go indoors," offering no explanation to my cousin, who thought I was nuts. I didn't tell anyone because I just didn't know how to express it to other people back then. I've only since told my brothers, but I don't think they believed me. Still freaks me out when I think about it today because it's the only time I've ever lost control of my body. It was almost like a dream, but the whole thing felt like it was happening in slow motion. TLDR. There have been a few times in my life when weird stuff has happened to me. I can't TLDR this stuff. I used to work in music and to radio with this band. The guitarist, Josh, of the band's best friend, Matt, had died a couple years back. He always talked about the kid and he seemed like a great guy. Josh always had this reoccurring dream where Matt was standing on this abandoned street which, supposedly, was metaphorical for purgatory. Josh had all these conversations with Matt in these dreams, and because he had overdosed unexpectedly, he felt like his spirit was not able to move on. At the end of the dreams, Matt would take a bulb from the street light on the street they were standing in the middle of. Josh described these dreams in extreme detail and I could pretty much picture what the street looked like. Fast forward to about 6 months into touring with these guys. They were huge Bright Eyes fans and wanted to stop in Cassadaga, Florida. Bright Eyes singer wrote an album there and it's a really creepy, spiritual medium place. It might be worth noting that 6/7 of the people I was with are all atheists. So we drive into Cassadaga around 2 or 3 AM and drive around. Suddenly, this big black dog comes in the middle of the road and just stops and looks at us. The guys in this band were weird as frick and were saying things like "follow the dog," It's trying to show us something, and in my mind, I'm just thinking they are all freaking idiots. We follow this dog for a few blocks, as it was walking pretty slowly. All of a sudden, we turn a street and the dog bolts. We try to speed up, but Josh says stop the freaking van. This is it. We are all confused and he gets out of the van and looks around. This is it. This is the street in my dreams. We hang out for about 15 minutes, and from the way he described the street, from having houses on the left to a park on the right, it was definitely the street. As we get in the van, a street light goes off and we just drive off. He claims he never had any more dreams about it, as there was closure on everything. Just got crazy goosebumps all over. My dad used to get up around 3 AM every morning for work. Starting at a very early age, I would wake up on my own and wander downstairs to see him before he left. One morning when I was about 4 years old, I made it to the bottom of the stairs and noticed that the front door was ajar. I opened it up and saw my father in his favorite work shirt making his way down the driveway to his truck in his typical work outfit, plaid shirt and Dickies. I swung the door open wide and yelled for him to come back for a hug before he left. He slowly turned around and just stared at me and started walking back towards the house. He was looking so strangely at me that it started to scare me, and I began crying and asking what was wrong. Just as he had almost reached me, a pair of arms encircled me from behind in a bear hug. I turned my head to see my understandably freaked out father staring at his doppelganger in the same outfit. The double took one look at my dad and ran down the driveway. Meanwhile, my dad yanked me in the house and locked the door. Weirdest morning ever. Never did quite figure that one out. I would not trust my 4-year-old memory of the event if it wasn't also witnessed by my father. He won't really talk about it these days, but my mom has since told me that he called out of work and she spent the day reassuring him he wasn't a nutcases. TLDR. Dad and I met his equally freaked out doppelganger at 3 AM in our own driveway. I was in class one day, sitting in a group of 3 people including myself. We were talking and my friend dropped his pen on the desk. I saw it stall in midair for a second, then drop on his desk. My friend asked, did anyone else see that? All my friends saw it, and it was just the weirdest thing I've ever seen. To this day I have no explanation for it. My little sister, call her Susie, and I were exploring the cottage a few years ago and came across a pair of walkie-talkies. Now this in itself wasn't unusual. It's an isolated, sprawling place shared by many friends and family who often leave things behind as they come and go. We run around in the night trying them out and find out there's about a 10-20 meter cutoff range. We're fooling around and eventually we're on opposite sides of the house when something like the following exchange goes down. Me. Breaker breaker comin'. This is Thundercat over. Susie. Giggling. This is Dragon 7. We are closing in on your location over. Me. Negative. You'll never catch me. Thundercat out. Susie. Giggling. Who is this? Me. This is Thundercat. Come in, Poop Smith. Susie. Giggling. No, who is this? At this point I walk into the next room and see Susie looking through a bookshelf. Walkie-talkie abandoned on the floor. She says hello to me and the giggling is still coming from the walkie-talkie. I look at her. I look at the walkie-talkie and ask, wait, who is this? The giggling stops on the other end of the line. There's nothing but dead air. The next house is a couple of km away and there's nothing but woods and a spooky cave around us. Susie says she got bored of the walkie-talkie a while ago and denies any part in the goofy codename conversation. We search the place top to bottom and find no one and nothing that could have been making the call. We try the walkie-talkie a few more times but are never able to raise our ghost girl again. I still accuse her of having been the voice on the other end of the line once in a while, but deep down I know that when I told her what went down, she showed real fear. TLDR. Haunted walkie-talkie. What if the girl on the walkie-talkie was your sister Susie, but the Susie that followed you home was not your sister? I had a monkey on my keychain back in high school. This chain was 3 links long. One day I was walking out to my car and I heard something hit the ground. I looked down to discover the monkey with links 1 and 2 of the chain still attached on the ground and link 3 still attached to my belt. All of the links were still fused together. My only guess is the chain phased itself apart. Why am I always so late to these threads? Sigh. Hope this gets read. I was a sophomore in HS at my GF's house watching a movie. It was around 10 PM when the flick ended. I proceed to skateboard home. I only lived like 2 blocks away and it was a pretty quiet suburban neighborhood. I'm skating down the hill towards a larger street. Larger but never really busy, especially not at night. When I reach the intersection I nail a rock. I had planned on blasting across the street since there were no cars coming either direction. I fly off the board, skid a good 3 or 4 feet on my head, right shoulder, hip and knee. I rolled to my back and screamed out in agony. The pain was so bad I couldn't really move. I look up the road and about 30 yards off is a car coming down the way, and where I landed, I was right in its path. 2-lane street. I was right in the middle of his lane. My head was aligned with the wheel. I tried like heck to move. I screamed. I yelled. I couldn't do anything. Car was about 15 yards off. He doesn't see me. Makes no attempt to swerve. 10 yards. I hear him barreling down. I close my eyes. Brace. Nothing. Open eyes. Look where the car had been. Nothing. Hear the car behind me. Look where it was supposed to be in the other direction. Taillights cruising up the road. I hadn't moved. He didn't swerve. It was like he passed through me, or I passed through him. There isn't really any way he could have passed over me, not with the way I had landed and was positioned in the street. It was a little car. I can't explain it. I got up, terrified, bloody and baffled, hobbled home and went to sleep. No one believed me, but it's freaking true. TLDR. Fell off my skateboard onto a street with a car headed down it. Car passed right through me. Wake up, Kyle. I was driving home from my girlfriend's one night, going home the back way. Where I live is very flat, so the road I was on was dead straight with no bumps, small hills or any places the road got higher or lower or anything like that. So I'm just driving straight. Got my high beams on because there's no one around, and I can see everything in front of me. There's no houses on either side, no driveways, just fields. Nothing behind me either. Out of nowhere, a car appears about 20 feet in front of me, driving the opposite direction on the other side of the road. I was going pretty fast so I pass them quickly, and when I look in my rear view, there's nothing there. Freaked me out so bad I had to pull over and gather my thoughts before I could keep going. Still freaks me out to remember it. My family owns a house on Cape Cod. The previous owner was a white supremacist with an autistic son named Jimmy. Jimmy was known for putting on a trench coat and fedora, climbing trees, and shooting cats and dogs with a BB gun. When my parents moved into the house, they found a bunch of Nazi paraphernalia in a bedroom. They put it in the shed, told the former owner they had a week to get rid of it, and then threw it out. Of course, at the age of 7, I didn't know any of this. That's when I was visited 5 nights in a row by a figure in a trench coat and fedora. He didn't have any detail. He looked like a silhouette, like he was being powerfully backlit but with no light source. He would stand in the corner of the room, or sit there crouched, or sit on the bed opposite mine, my brother's bed, but he was at summer camp at the time. One time, he sat in a rocking chair, and when I looked later, he was gone but the chair was still rocking. After a few nights of this, I told my parents about it. My mom called it a nightmare, but my dad was intrigued. He told me to tell the figure, Jimmy, I don't have your stuff. So the next night, when the figure appeared again in the corner of the room, I said, Jimmy, I don't have your stuff, and Jimmy walked right over to me, put his face an inch away from mine, and then disappeared. I never saw him again. Years later, I found out about the history of the house. I've often wondered if I had heard it before, and somehow suppressed it and then imagined my encounters with Jimmy, but he was and remains entirely vivid to me. Not sure if this relates, but about 2 years into my relationship with my GF, we'll call her Susan, I had a dream about my ex. Dream went like this. I was in my room, at my mother's house, where I lived at the time, slamming my ex, balls to the wall sexing it up. I knew I was cheating on Susan, but didn't care. So in the middle of it, I look over to the window, which you can see the back porch from, and Susan is there, watching us, crying and mortified. I then woke up. I thought it was a weird dream, but dismissed it. A few days go by and Susan and I are hanging out in my room. She brings up this weird dream she had a few days prior, and describes my exact dream except from her POV looking through the window. Freaked me the frick out. Didn't say anything about it at the time. I still haven't said anything. 5 or 6 years later, it still weirds me out. You need to call your ex and ask her if she had the same dream. I was working in a decades-old nursing home out in the middle of the woods in PA as a nurse aide on the night shift. Wife won't come visit me at work because she insists it. Looks like a Rob Zombie video. A resident pulls the mechanical call bell in the bathroom for assistance. I flip it off and help her back to bed. As I'm exiting the only way in or out, the call bell goes on again. I look back and it's not the electronic one in her bedroom, which blinks slowly. It's the mechanically operated one you have to physically pull in the bathroom, which blinks twice as fast. The lady is close to 400 pounds and non-ambulatory. There is no physical way she could have pulled that bell. I sure as heck did not, and there was no one else around. My father died in 2008. A night before visiting his house for the last time, he appeared in my dream, where he handed to me a black camera in a plastic bag, and specifically said, "Take this camera, as I won't be needing it anymore," and I took it from him. First thing in the morning, I visit his house, where most of the stuff is already moved by my uncle, and open one of his wardrobes, find a sealed cardboard box deep inside, rip it open with a knife and take out his retro black camera. Apparently my uncle missed that one, and took off all his other electronics but the camera. All I can say is that this experience was a proper communication and it significantly eased my pain, knowing that something remains after a loved one passes. Driving to work one day, stop at a red light, look to my left, next to me at the light, beige 2007 Chevy Suburban, look across the intersection, 2007 beige Chevy Suburban, look at the traffic crossing, 2007 beige Chevy Suburbans, going through the intersection. Not so much a glitch in the Matrix moment as it was a stuck in Grand Theft Auto moment. My mom and I both dream about the same place. It's a 3-story White House. We usually dream about the house on the same night, so that in the morning we have conversations like, "So, the house was in the Midwest last night." "Yeah, I know." "Was the laundry out on the line?" "Yeah, no. The cloths pins were rotten." The first time we found out that we had been dreaming about the same house was the day my ma came out and said I just had the most terrifying dream ever. I was in a big, square, 3-story house in the woods and I was just investigating it. I think I was going to buy it. I went up to the 3rd story and got lost and then ran into this idiot man-child. "Mom, was he wearing a blue work shirt and suspenders? Did he sleep on the mattress in the back room? Yes. Was the 3rd story kitchen floor rotting through? Yes." The conversation went on for hours as we went into minute detail. Everything, and I mean everything, matched up. We ended the conversation by each drawing a picture of the house. Identical. So yeah, there's that. Posted this before in a similar thread that didn't gain traction. Of course I'll preface this with the usual, I'm not a superstitious or generally spiritual person, but in high school I was in the drum line, and we usually practiced early in the morning prior to school starting. We were inside the band room that day because it was fairly cold. So anyway, I'm doing my thing, playing the tenors, toms for the layman, and I drop one of my mallets. I turn to pick it up and I can't find it. There is about 10 feet of open bare floor surrounding me and nowhere to be found. My instructor stops us and basically just asks me what the problem is. So several of us start searching around. Can't find it. I say screw it and grab a spare set. About 20 minutes later, the band director walks in, unlocks his office, sits at his desk and knocks on the window. I look up and he picks up the mallet off his desk with a look like, "What is this doing in here?" I could verify that it was mine because I marked each set. Nobody had gone in or out. No gap under the door. Locked room. Ended up on the desk. There were 15 of us in the room at that time and there was a unanimous nope moment. I was stunned and one of my buddies came unglued. We pretty much cancelled the rest of rehearsal right there and many of us were pretty bugged about it the rest of the day. I couldn't concentrate on anything for almost a week after that. Eventually my brain just filed it away under unsolved mysteries and I went on with life. TLDR. Playing drums. Dropped stick. Ended up in a locked room. So the band director finds it, freaks you out, and lets you leave early so he can go home. Genius. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.